Welcome to the channel. In today's video, we are going to be doing top end gaskets in this BMW R100S. Now let me bring you around and show you why. So now if you look in at the pushrod seals there, you can see all the grease and oil, and then you can see where it's all leaked down along the oil pan there. So it's primarily happening on the left side, but the right side is also leaking. So on the valve cover, we have this center nut, and that's a 13 millimeter, so we'll get that undone. And then on the sides of the valve cover, here and here, there's just two 10 millimeter nuts. So we'll undo both of those, and then the valve cover will come right off. And then with those loosened up, we can just pull our valve cover straight off. And then with a flathead screwdriver, we can undo our carburetors. So when we undo our carburetors, all we're doing is undoing these hose clamps here. And then once the hose clamps are loosened up, we're going to slide our carburetor out of here and just kind of tuck it off to the side. And then we can take our big exhaust nut off with this special wrench. I sell a very similar wrench, and I'll have that linked below. As you can see, once that's loosened up, it should come off really easily. And what you really got to be cautious of is messing up these threads. And then just coming over here onto the left side, we'll go ahead and do the same thing. Removing the valve covers, removing the carburetor, and then removing the exhaust manifold here. Spark plug wires, and we'll just pull our spark plugs. And then on both sides, we can loosen up this nut that clamps onto the exhaust manifold. So now we have the head pipes. They're not removed, but they're just pulled away from the cylinder head. We have like a little bit of a gap here, so we can then remove all four of these nuts right here, and then these nuts here and here, remove the head, and then remove the cylinder, and then we're pretty much on our way back together after that. So this part takes a little bit of this is kind of where it gets a little harder, I'll say. We need to be very cautious. Just keeping our push rods and rocker arm assemblies. We want to put them back the same way we took them off. So let's get the engine at top dead center, and then we'll get going on this. So now right above or right beside the dipstick, there's your timing cover here. We're going to remove that little timing plug, and then we're going to rotate the wheel with the bike in gear until we get a OT mark in the timing window. So I'm just going to put it up into gear. So I'm going to put it in the highest gear and then just jog the wheel. And we can see the flywheel move there. So I'm actually just going to keep moving it until I get the OT mark in the window there. So if you look in the timing window there, you can see that OT mark. That means on top. The cylinders are on top dead center. One's at top dead center overlap and the other's on top dead center compression. So if I move my valves here, I can tell you this side right here is on top dead center compression, and on the other side, both valves are going to be tight because both valves are slightly open. So with a 15 millimeter, we're going to undo these four nuts right here, and then get our rocker arm assemblies out of here, and then our push rods. So when you're doing so, I like to just lay out a towel and create like a diagram on the towel. So we'll do like, obviously this is the right side. So we'll do like right side intake, right side exhaust, and that'll just ensure that everything goes back together correctly. And then once we get it all back together, obviously we're gonna have to adjust our valves, and that'll make that a little bit easier. So this side was on overlap. It doesn't matter it's not like you have to turn the engine, so you're only taking apart the one side that's on top dead center compression. It doesn't matter, as long as the engine's on top dead center, you'll be great. So this side right here is going to be the right side exhaust. And then this right here is going to be the right side intake. So we get those set aside like that. And then this is going to be our intake push rod, and this is going to be our exhaust push rod. And we're just kind of setting that off to the side there. And then we're ready to undo both of these nuts here and here to then remove our cylinder head. So with a 15 millimeter on an extension, we're gonna undo this top one, and it's the same size on the bottom here. So if your cylinder head sticks at all, just kind of tap it with that hammer. You can see it comes right off. These are the washers for those nuts. And we'll take our cylinder head off, and it looks just fine in there. It's a little carboned up, but not a big deal. And then we can take our cylinder off of here, so you can see this is our head gasket that we're going to end up replacing, but the cylinder should just give it a little tap. And now we're just doing the same thing on the left side, loosening up all 4 of these nuts with that 15 millimeter, and then undoing the other 2 nuts on the top and bottom that hold the cylinder head on, ensuring that everything's nice and organized and goes back together the same way that we took it apart. This side right here is going to be on top dead center compression, so both valves are slightly open, which in return is going to make this side a little bit easier to come apart, not super easier. Our exhaust side, our intake side, undo those upper and lower nuts here and here. So then the next thing we can do is just remove our push rod seals here. You should be able to just grab onto them and then just twist them right off like that. And then what we're gonna wanna do is clean up our cylinder base here. And there's actually a groove in the bottom of this cylinder. Some don't have the groove, some do. And then 2 O-rings here and here that we're gonna end up replacing. So you can just use a razor blade or whatever tool to kind of scrape all the silicone or whatever might be on your cylinder base. Pop these O-rings out, and then just make sure to keep this or get this groove in the cylinder, get that nice and clean. Now that we have our cylinder base all cleaned up, we can install our new pushrod seals. So our new pushrod seals we're gonna install on our pushrod tubes here, and there's a little line on the pushrod seal that we want just parallel up and down this tube. So once we get closer to actually putting these things on, we can kind of fine tune that. But I just like to kind of sight down here and get these as straight as I can. And then there's these 2 O-rings that go in your cylinder there and there. And if you're gonna have a tough time getting those to stick, you can use a little dab of silicone or a little bit of grease to try and get them to stay so they don't slide off. And then there's this large white O-ring that just goes around your cylinder base in that groove there. Make sure this piston tool is straight on here. Line up the cylinder, make sure our O-rings are all still in place, which they are, and then slide it on just like that. We can kind of pull our cylinder out and then grab this tool out of here. So now what I'm doing is gonna slide the cylinder on the whole way. I wanna make sure our pushrod seals are straight and everything's aligned so that it just drops right on. And then I'm gonna come down here and I'm just looking at those 2 notches on the seal, making sure that those are still straight up and down. And then once that is on there, and just ensuring that when we put our gasket on here, we want to look at the holes. Here, this is a good example right here. So you can see with our gasket on how these holes really don't align right there. And if we pull it out and flip it and then put it back on, you can see those holes line up much better. So you just want to make sure this is on the right way. Otherwise, the gasket will actually rub on the push rods. And you can see right here where the push rod's kind of polished there. That's literally from that gasket rubbing on the push rod. And then we will slide our cylinder head on. Drop our push rods down in there. Again, I kind of had this laid out so they're all going in together the same way they came out, and then those are in. So the next thing we'll do is we'll put our rockers on both sides here, and then obviously we're going to have to adjust our valves. That's kind of a given. And then and this is kind of rushing to get all this together because I want to seat all these gaskets down, and I want to get these torqued up. So we can get the cylinder head nut on. And the bottom cylinder head nut on. So now it's time to slide the left cylinder on. Same thing on the right. I'm using this piston ring compressor. Compress all the piston rings. I got all my O-rings and stuff in place. My head gasket's in place, lined up correctly with the push rod. And this just goes right on like that. And then I can get this tool out of here pretty easily. And then just slide the cylinder on the rest of the way. Be careful about this head gasket. Make sure it stays on all these studs. Get that on there. So I'm going to slide my cylinder head on here, just like that. Put my push rods in here, and I had everything laid out so I can put everything in pretty easily. The same orientation that I took it out in, obviously. Get our rocker arm assembly installed on here. And then our cylinder head bolts up here, top and bottom. So on our left side, I'm just checking here, the OT mark is still in the window here. So we're gonna first check, there should be valve clearance here. Yep, I don't know if you can see it on camera or hear it, but there's valve clearance there. So we're gonna use 0.10 millimeters on the intake side. And this, kind of the analogy I like to use is it should feel like you're dragging it across a magnet. This right here might be a little too easy because I can still feel a little bit of free play even with the feeler gauge in there. So what I'm going to do, kind of what I do, is I just go back and forth. So I will kind of hold the one nut, break it free, move this just a tiny bit, and then tighten it up, and then check again. So I just went like maybe a 1/16 of a turn, and that feels way tighter. So that feels exactly what I'm talking about, and there's no free play there. So it feels exactly like I'm dragging it across a magnet, again with no free play. So I'll then just make sure that's tight, and then moving over here to the exhaust side, 0.20 millimeters. That's pretty tight. You can see that that feeler gauge kind of, I probably could force it in there, but it seems pretty tight. So I'm just going to loosen this one up just barely, So I'm gonna have 1 wrench here, 1 wrench here, and then I'm gonna loosen this up, and then I'm gonna loosen up this arm just barely, and then tighten this. So like I said, I just took like a 32nd of a turn out, and now that feels way better. So it goes in there nice if you line it up. And then same with the other side. So now our left side here is good. So now what I'm going to do is rotate the engine 360 degrees. So you should be able to see that. So you can see the S mark in the window there. And then these, as I suspected, these valves are both open. So after we adjusted them, they're both open a little bit, so there's no slack in here. So now on the other side, there's going to be a little bit of free play. So we'll start with our intake side. This needs to be loosened. So I'm just going to loosen up the lock nut here. This kind of spun a little bit. I'm going to get it to a point where it's nice, like right there. You can see that the feeler gauge kind of can hold its own weight. I would actually argue that that might be a little bit too tight, so I'm going to put my wrench on here, just loosen it a tiny bit, and then snug this up. And right there you can see slips in and out really nice. Can barely, can't even support the weight of the feeler gauges. Okay, barely supports the weight of the feeler gauges. And then check again, and boom, you can see right there. That's about perfect. Barely can support the weight of the gauges. Feels as if I'm dragging it across a magnet. And then we'll reinstall our valve cover with a new valve cover gasket. Just like that. And our stud actually kind of came out. That's relatively common, not a big deal. Get this started. That's a 13 millimeter, and then we'll get our two 10 millimeter nuts back here tightened up with those two, with the wave washers that came off. And then we're going to do the same thing here on the left side as we did on the right. We can now go ahead and get our exhaust put back on. So it's pretty easy. We just get it aligned in the head. It actually should just slide right on. So now with this exhaust fully on and our gaskets in place, I'm going to put a little bit of copper anti-seize compound on the threads, just to prevent, I guess make it easier for the next guy, if there ever is a next guy. And that'll prevent it from seizing up and ruining those threads. And then as far as torquing this, what I do is just put my tool on here and then just use a rubber mallet and just kind of tap it on. And then we can tighten up our exhaust manifold clamp, or mount, I guess, down here. And then get our spark plugs and our spark plug wire connected. So now we can reinstall our carburetors. Pretty simple. Should have everything already on here. We never unhooked any cables or anything, so what we're doing basically So then we want to tighten up all the hose clamps that we loosened. And what I like to do is, if you have a strong attention to detail, just making sure all these hose clamps are like oriented in the same direction. Purely a aesthetic thing, but makes it look a little more, I don't know, complete. Or like you knew what you were doing, I guess. And then doing the same thing here on the left side, getting our carburetor set back in place. And then just tightening up all of our hose clamps. Thank you so much for watching my video. If this video helped you out in any way, please consider subscribing my channel. Let me know what you want to see below. And as always, have a safe ride.